Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Experience Maker Live. This is Dan Gingiss, customer experience virtual speaker, coach, author, and podcaster. And this is episode 16 of our little show. That's right, we are completing 4 months of the Experience Maker today. We're on every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, so mark your calendar, and we're going to be here for a long time. Very excited today to introduce you to a good friend of mine who I got the pleasure of hanging out with for a while at a recent event before all the events were shut down. And I always like to bring people onto the show that go to the same barber as I do, because I know I can trust them immediately. And you're going to see a theme even in maybe next week as well. But I'd like to officially welcome to the show Mr. Justin Robbins, who is the content marketing strategist at a company named 8x8. How you doing, man?
Hey, Dan, looking good. It's good to see you. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing fine. I just need the glasses now, and I think we are just virtual twins.
I love it.
So for those that don't know you or 8x8, tell us a little bit. Fill us in.
Sure. So the short story on me is I've always thought of myself as a bit of a customer experience mutt. I worked in customer experience from really the time I was 12 and had a paper route and got pulled into a contact center, up and through, doing customer experience at companies like Hershey, and then eventually for ICMI and HDI. So that's the short version of it. But at 8x8, what I do is I work on all of our content there. So you think about what are the stories that brands have the opportunity to tell. And that's what I get to do every day is what are the stories of communications professionals, customer experience professionals, and how they're, I think of, especially right now, how do you kind of survive and thrive in the midst of uncertainty and interesting circumstances? So that's the short version, Dan.
Well, and I imagine that demand for your product has changed just a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. So 8x8 is cloud communication. So it's video, it's phone systems, it's contact center, it's chat, and that's become the crux of the remote work movement that we've experienced over the past 2 months. So it's been unreal. Looking at what things were like in mid-February to what adoption and usage is like today is, I think, like nothing anyone would have expected.
And so how do you react to something like that? I mean, obviously there's lots of companies out there that have exactly the opposite problem, right? Which is that business has gone down to almost nothing. Here, you're in a business that is thriving because of the situation that we're in. So what's been going on? Take us behind the scenes in terms of how does management react and how do you can't prepare. So how do you react when it happens?
Yeah, it's interesting. There were a couple different things that happened, and I'll talk about it at a few levels. For us as employees of 8x8, when we were going into early and mid February and saw that the world was kind of going the way that the world was doing, we had actually started kind of an at home experiment where we were sending our teams to work remotely before it was even mandated. So for us, in a lot of ways, we were doing it as a, hey, could we do this if the need ever arose for us to move in our entire company to work from home? And in our situation, the experiment didn't end, right? It just became a mandate for us. I think from how do you respond from a service provider experience? It's an interesting dynamic, right? It's an unfortunate circumstance that really led to this, and I think towing that line carefully is what anybody who's in the midst of serving people in the midst of circumstances like this, I think that's what you have to do, right? So for me as a content person, it's been really intentional about who are the heroes that we're able to highlight. What are the stories of people who are persevering and are responding well, and so that's part of the responsibility that I've taken on. For our teams who are supporting the infrastructure and the things that actually enable people to stay connected. It's a lot of coffee and a lot of long hours, right? I think that's at the end of the day the attitude and the response from my peers across the business has been, let's lean in the midst of this circumstance and do whatever needs to be done to ensure that people's needs are met. That in a short version is really what it's been like, Dan.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, for the companies that are still providing services, it is about leaning in and pivoting and figuring out, what do customers need now that may or may not be the same as what they needed before COVID-19. And I think that there's a lot of companies, a lot of great examples out there of companies that have succeeded in that. Versus, sometimes the initial response is to just kind of curl up in a ball. I know we've all sort of been there, and kind of hope this goes away. But I love that your organization is really getting out in front of it, and trying to figure out how you can best provide what is, thankfully for you, a needed service right now.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Dan, is I think that you've seen so certain people certainly felt that feeling to crawl up into the ball, but I think more what we've seen and even now where we're pivoting. So what we saw is one of two things really happened within organizations for organizations that were thinking about remote work as part of their business continuity plan. This was just an exercise that they had already kind of been building into their playbook. But I think for unfortunately a larger number of organizations, they had some sort of short-term disaster recovery plan. Like I grew up leading contact centers, and for me, like we had the plan if the contact center was going to be out of power for a day or two. We had we had some of these plans, but if you would have said to us at that time, by the way, this plan now has to extend for months of your entire workforce being at home. I mean, it broke the playbook, and I think that's one of the big challenges of maybe that feeling of wanting to crawl up into a ball. But even now, where we're pivoting is what are the longer term implications on this? Because I really believe that the experience that we've all just had and are kind of now in the midst of trying to learn and adapt from is going to become the board level conversation for the next 12 to 18 months on how do we really rethink the contact center experience, the customer experience, the communications experience. We have to re-engineer the way we do things if we want to have if we don't want to have a repeat of the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the way I've been thinking about it is that, how many of us have sat in those meetings where we've talked about all the possible things that could possibly go wrong and why we need business continuity plans. And yet we sit there in the meeting and we say, oh, this is never going to happen to us, right? We don't need to be really prepared for this. If there's a fire, we'll handle it. If there's a hurricane, we'll handle it. If there's a pandemic, those don't ever really happen. And now I think one of the big differences is that obviously with a pandemic, nobody's saying it isn't going to happen anymore. But businesses are going to have to be prepared for the next time it happens, and probably be prepared for the fact that it will happen again. And that's the new normal that we all live in. And my guess is that just as a few years ago, compliance teams exploded in the financial services and healthcare industries. And I remember one company, they were talking about how they had more compliance employees than marketing employees, which frankly I thought was a bad sign. But I think now that same thing is going to happen in the business continuity field, is that we need people in business continuity and maybe even public relations to help companies prepare for what will not just be exiting out of COVID-19, but will be inevitably another thing that comes up down the road.
Yeah, so I think you're right there, Dan. And so to me, I lump it into like three questions or concerns that I have as a result of it. Number one is the concern is, I would advise business leaders against the thought of, hey, this is a once in a lifetime thing. And yeah, we're going to have other situations, but they'll never be as bad as this one. Right. The minute we go down that path, and the unfortunate part is I know that there's still going to be a percentage of people who they're just going to choose to think that way. But my hope is that we can, steer a majority of people to think that we've now been exposed to what happens if we don't plan for that worst case scenario. So hopefully they're building that into their plans. I think for me, the bigger shift that I'm hedging is going to happen, and where you're going to see kind of people emerge on, hey, we have a solution and here's how we can help you, is what is this going to do for how we run our operations? Let's use contact centers as an example, where social distancing is really hard to practice, and the rows of how you build your contact center, or even the open floor plans that you had, are built around volume and accommodating people. And now if I'm running a contact center and I can't have the same number of employees, I'm forced with the decision of, do I now start having a percentage or a majority of people work from home? Do I have to look at buying more real estate? And I think business continuity, right, is going to have all sorts of implications, especially on customer experience and contact center professionals, because what we do has become such an integral part of how businesses operate, especially in the midst of circumstances like we're in right now.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's interesting that you just mentioned that. I'm going to see if I can share the screen here real fast. But I actually just wrote a blog post this week on that very topic. Here it is. Could working from home become permanent? And what does that mean for companies and their office space? And I mean, I would not want to be in the commercial real estate business right now. But if you want to read more about that, go to dangingiss.com/blog, and you can check out my newest on that. But yeah, I definitely think that this is a new normal. And I guess the point I was trying to make was that we now have to be prepared for whatever else is going to come down the pike, because this is probably not, while it's the first time in our lifetimes, my guess is that it's not the last time. Ryan Baker, who's on, thanks for watching, says, I think teams have to be thinking about what is their summer plan, their fall plan, in case this comes back, and how do they evolve as a business. Totally agree. And Leslie O'Flahaven, thank you so much for being here, says, so many employees in all roles deeply hate the open floor plan, which is true. And we may never see the open floor plan again. And, you know, likewise, there's people that hate and love working from home. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges. Right now, there's a lot of people that hate it just because they can't walk outside and they can't leave. But I think what's going to happen is people are going to start realizing how much they do like it, how much they don't have, you don't have a commute, you're home for dinner every night. I've talked to a lot of people that feel like they're more productive now at home. I talked to one manager who said she's spending more time with her team now than she did when they were in the same building together, because of all of the Zoom calls and 8x8 calls and other things that are set up, video conferencing that are set up for businesses to do that. They're actually meeting more often, which is kind of interesting to me. And so if I'm a business owner, I'm looking at, why am I paying all this rent, or why am I paying this mortgage on a big building and all this equipment and utilities and cleaning services and all of this stuff? It's a ton of money. I'm guessing that a lot of companies are going to go the route of Twitter, which was sort of the basis of that blog, who just decided that basically they're going to allow work from home forever. How do you think that translates to a contact center?
So there's two things I want to say before I answer that first. And I saw a post by someone on social media in the recent weeks, and they made this comment about if you're new to working from home, like, let's be super clear, you're not working from home in a normal environment right now. You're working from home in the midst of a global pandemic. And the reason that resonated with me is, as someone who's worked from home for over a decade, I definitely see a different approach to work from home right now than the rest of my career. And so for people who are skeptical or have dealt with distractions or additional stressors, I would encourage people to really give it a chance as things start to normalize, and I'll use air quotes for normalize there, because this is not a typical work from home situation, and it's not going to be the typical work from home situation as we do find some semblance of normal. So that's just the one asterisk I want to say for people who are skeptics of it is this isn't typical. The second thing I was going to mention, Dan, is what I love about what's happened right now is it is forced intentionality in so many ways. You mentioned about that manager spending more time than ever with her team. It has forced us to be intentional about who we communicate, how we communicate, what we share, when we share it, who we're connecting with. And now, I actually think it's going to do a lot to help team collaboration in ways that just maybe didn't happen when people were in the office and took some of these things for granted, perhaps. To get to your question, though, about, how do I see this remote work movement affecting the contact center? Again, I go back to my time running contact centers, and the number one thing that it gets me excited about is it's now shifted the paradigm for people who maybe would have never attempted a work from home mix in their contact center before, and now they've had some discoveries of what it can actually do for them. You've got positive benefits of now you can expand your candidate pool. If you're dead set on they have to be within a certain driving distance of an office, perhaps now it's giving you an opportunity to explore people in 2 counties over, or 2 states over, or halfway across the globe. So I get excited about that potential for a global workforce. It also gets me excited about the potential for contact centers to do much more adaptive scheduling models. And what I mean by that is historically, a lot of contact centers built their shifts around what was convenient for people to be in the office. So it's a 4-hour shift or it's an 8-hour shift, because who would want to drive into work for 30 minutes, even if you only need somebody to accommodate a 30-minute spike of volume. And now with remote employees, I could easily have someone say, hey, my peaks are from 12 to 12:30, from 3:15 to 3:45. And somebody doesn't have to commute into the office, and you can be much more agile with your workforce. So, those are 2 things that jump off to me right off the gate. I think they're the implications of needing to be really intentional about coaching and development. And of course, in regulatory environments, you've got to have the right parameters around control of information within the home office. But again, those are considerations, but they shouldn't be completely prohibitive of taking your workforce to be at home.
Yeah, I think the key word there is flexibility, and we're getting a lot of great comments coming in. I want to read a couple, and one of them mentions that. Lisa Sedlak says the other thing to think about is companies want to be more family friendly. Imagine work from home on occasion, at least for parents who have doctor's appointments, sick kid days, etc. Just because I need to be home with a sick kid doesn't mean I can't do work. So I think that's something that companies are learning. The ones that never allowed work from home and really frowned on it and have now been forced into it are starting to learn, hey, our employees actually can get work done. In fact, sometimes they're getting more work done. They're not taking long lunch breaks. Again, they're not traveling to and from. They're not meeting at the water cooler and chatting. They're just getting work done during the day. Chris Strub, our buddy, says, feels like for better or for worse, people will need to adjust their spaces at home to make work from home viable. I think that's absolutely true. And I think Leslie, somewhere in there, had another a comment. Leslie, I think I may have missed it. I apologize. So yes, I think companies are starting to learn what's necessary, and call centers, contact centers. I think you made a really good point about hiring practices and the ability to bring on people from really all over the world. I think not just in contact centers, is a huge opportunity for companies to really start bringing in the person or people that they've been trying to get. I mean, I've a couple times I've worked with, been recruited to companies that want me to move away from Chicago, which is just not something I'm prepared to do, right? And the idea that you now could bring somebody on either virtually or partially virtually, I think it changes everything. I want to pivot a little bit here, speaking of pivoting our business, because one of the things that I asked you to tell me when you booked this was to remind you about a customer experience story.
Yeah.
And what you said was the broken elevator at Tiffany's and the Blue Box Cafe. Now, I don't know if that's 1 or 2 stories, but I am definitely intrigued, and I'm hoping you will tell us about the broken elevator.
Totally. And it's one story. So as a speaker as well, this has been one of my favorite stories to share with customer experience leaders, and frankly, anyone who's thinking about when we have unexpected circumstances, what are the opportunities that they present for us. So about 2 years ago, a good friend of mine, Becca, got engaged, and Becca was one of those people who grew up with her favorite movie being Breakfast at Tiffany's. And when it came time to arrange her bachelorette party, she wanted nothing more than to have a weekend in New York City and have the opportunity to go to Tiffany's and visit it in person. So one of the things at Tiffany's is they have a restaurant there called the Blue Box Cafe. The thing about Blue Box Cafe is reservations open a year in advance. You have you can call that day, but really within minutes they're sold out. So they had tried to get into Blue Box Cafe, just couldn't do it. So they get to Tiffany's, right? The day for their trip finally arrives. They got to Tiffany's, got in probably about a half hour before closing, and we're walking around the store, decide to get in the elevator and go visit the second floor. They get in, elevator attendant closes the door. It takes a few lurches up and then just stops. They end up being stuck in this elevator for almost 2 hours. Now, mind you, the entire
No.
time, yeah, right. So just think about this, right? At this point, like Tiffany's has closed. Melanie was the name of the elevator attendant, and the entire time she's doing everything that she can do to put them at ease. But mind you, I mean, this is at dinner time, so they're hungry. You're in New York City walking around, so of course you're hydrating, which meant that you have to use a restroom, and now they're hungry. They have to use a restroom. This dream experience of going to Tiffany's was just like obliterated by being stuck in an elevator for 2 hours. So Melanie was doing everything she could. She's on the phone back and forth trying to make small talk. I have some pictures that they'd posted to Instagram that I'll share back on social media after we're done with this episode today. But in a nutshell, after 2 hours, they finally get the elevator resolved, and they come out, and there's some employees who had stuck around. There's fire crews, everything that you would expect, getting people off of an elevator. And this is where I think Tiffany's had an interesting opportunity in front of them. Right, they weren't expecting an elevator to shut down and to have a bachelorette party trapped in it for 2 hours. They could have said, "Hey, we're so sorry. Please don't sue us. Have a great weekend. Again, we're sorry." They did so much more than that. So very first thing they did is they said, "We can imagine that you're hungry. Please join us up here." And so they had a couple employees that they were able to pull together, open up the entire Blue Box Cafe for them, and they pulled out all the stops and had everything available for Becca and the girls in her bachelorette party. On top of that, they said, not only that, but we're giving every single one of you a card that for the rest of your life, if you ever want to be our guest, just call us and you are guaranteed a table at the Blue Box Cafe. Not only that, did they give them all a little blue something to go home with, but then they also connected with Melanie after the fact. And, I talked to Becca's sister just the other day, and they continue to text with Melanie. And there were a bunch of lessons. And that's actually one of the keynotes that I do is actually based around the lessons that can be learned from what Tiffany's and what Melanie did in this circumstance. But to me, what was amazing is, not only did they pivot in an unexpected situation, but they were anticipating unspoken needs. They really took this opportunity to not just, I think the meal and an apology would have been enough, but the lifetime table at the Blue Box Cafe, the little blue something, all of these elements to me, like, it just floors me, and it really impresses me. And it makes me think that not every brand has a Blue Box Cafe. Not every brand can give away a little blue something. But every day we've got opportunities to be watching for the unset expectations that our customers are making, to have those kind of surprise and delight moments. But more importantly, to empower people at the front line. Like, if I think about Melanie walking into her job that day, she probably wasn't expecting to have a navigate, but she did exactly what she needed to provide information so they could adapt. So that's the really short version of it. But it just, to me, is a great example of the potential that we have as brands, and the limits that we have are the things that we put on ourselves. Right, there's no stopping what we could do to create great experiences. The only thing stopping us is the parameters that we put into place.
Very well said. And, it's like a hyper example of what happens with companies, frankly, quite often, which is that, we're often judged most of all on the experiences that we provide after something goes wrong. And, I remember somebody once said that customer service is what happens when customer experience breaks. And the thing is what I'm getting from what you said, Justin, is that we don't have to wait for there to be a problem to create experiences like this. Now, Tiffany's and Redbox Cafe, didn't wake up that morning expecting or hoping for an elevator to fail by any stretch of the imagination. But they reacted in a way, and they used a bad situation in order to create a great experience. And what I try to advise clients to do is, again, don't wait for that bad situation to happen. Sure, you want to have plans in place and you want to be reactive when you can, but how do we be proactive and create great experiences in the first place that people want to talk about, and not have to wait for that elevator to break. But I love the story, and it's a fantastic example. And I was just noticing as you were talking about it that my whole color scheme of my brand is actually looks like it could be Tiffany. So
you are, it's funny. I saw that and I was like, that is very similar to the slide I used to tell that story.
yeah.
Well, and what's interesting, Dan, is then I often get the question of, okay, but in an entire customer experience, there can be so many touch points. Like, where do we focus on to have the greatest impact? And for me, I'm a total like research buff, so I want to try to understand the science behind things like experiences. And I've always been a fan of the peak end rule. And essentially, it says that the most impactful, the things that people remember the most, that resonate with the most, are the height and the conclusion of that experience. And so, I think at the height, it was probably when the elevator lurched, right? But then the end was obviously that. And that, to me, when I try to figure out like how do we create great experiences, it's always looking at those two pieces first.
That's great. Totally agree. Justin, it's been a pleasure. These half hours go by so incredibly fast, and I just had to look down and be surprised that it was already 29 minutes after. So we got to wrap this up. But anything else that is on your mind right now, or that you're sort of looking forward to as we start to emerge out of this pandemic, and maybe changes that we'll see?
Dan, at the end of the day, I mean, this has affirmed for me that we're resilient people, and the way that we've, still come together for virtual happy hours, or the way that we've used it to connect. What I'm excited about is how we use that. I'm gonna go back to that word intentionality. I'm excited to see how this has kind of helped us not just slow down our lives in some ways, but really focus on how do we be intentional about the way that we're connecting and communicating with other friends, coworkers. It doesn't matter, right? So that's what I'm most excited and most hopeful for, is that we come out of this as a society that's more intentional about our relationships and the way that we're connecting with people.
Amen. I'll drink to that. Well, Justin Robbins from 8x8, thank you so much for being here. It is always a pleasure to hang out and chat with you. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our viewers for being here as well today. Thank you for all of the questions, great questions. We love to see those. And just want to tell you that, again, we are here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central. I'm on the Central Time Zone. So we really appreciate you joining us on LinkedIn and also Periscope. Recordings are always put up on YouTube within 24 hours, so you can join us there as well. Next week, we are going to have a friend of both mine and Justin's on the show. We're going to have James Dodkins, who is the self-proclaimed CX rock star, but he is not self-proclaimed. He's proclaimed by others to be the most influential CX person in all of the United Kingdom. So definitely join us for James Dodkins next week. Once again, I'm Dan Gingiss for The Experience Maker. Thank you so much. Have a great long holiday weekend, and we'll see you next week.